Hello, this is Martin Lewis from MoneySavingExpert.com. Yesterday, the Chancellor announced a change to the cut-off date for furloughing, where an employee can be put on standby, they're not allowed to work, and the employer gets 80% of their salary up to a maximum £2,500. This has been a big issue because many people have been caught out by a gap, what they're calling the New Starter furlough, and rightly they have been vocally campaigning about this. Effectively, we have a flexible job market, and people who left their jobs after the 28th of February, the prior cut-off date, have been asking for help because they're not eligible for any of the mechanisms of support. So yesterday we did see the Chancellor change the date, and I want to do some back of the envelope calculations for you of exactly what percentage of people that's likely to help. Now, the first thing I should say is we should be glad the Chancellor's changed the date. Many people have wanted that to happen, including me, and the date had been changed, and it will certainly help tens of thousands of people, and that is a good thing. But the number being quoted is 200,000, and I have questions into where that 200,000 number comes from. I don't have a baseline number. I've heard some talking about 250,000 people were affected by the New Starter furlough. I don't know that. So I'm going to look at roughly what percent of people who aren't supported because they changed jobs after the 28th of February will now be supported. So the first thing we need to say is we have to take out of this help anybody who didn't start. If you didn't start your new job because they cancelled your new job, you are not eligible for help from the changing of the date. I don't know how many people that is, so I'm just going to discount that now, and we're going to look at people who did start jobs. Now, this government figure of 200,000 said 200,000 people will be helped. That can't be true because whether you're furloughed or not is at the discretion of the employer. So that 200,000 figure, one presumes, must mean they're saying 200,000 people will now be eligible to be furloughed who weren't before. Even then, I'm sceptical, and here's why. So, the first thing we need to say is the crucial point for what counts now is the RTI submission from the employer to HMRC. RTI stands for real-time information, effectively when the employer told HMRC that someone is on the payroll. Your start date doesn't matter. I've had that confirmed. I'm afraid that'll be disappointing news for some. It is only the date of the RTI submission. So let's look at that. Well, the first thing to say is you'll always have an RTI submission before you were paid. So anyone who was paid weekly or paid fortnightly and started early on in the month, you should be eligible for furlough. But the data I've seen shows only 25% of people are paid weekly or fortnightly. The rest are paid roughly monthly. So that's 75% of people. Next, when do people actually get paid? So even if you started on the 1st of March, it doesn't mean you're paid then. Well, I did a Twitter poll yesterday. 42,000 people responded. I know it isn't a statistically representative sample of the UK, but I think it's probably a decent loose indication. Within that, 68% of people said they got paid from the 25th to the end of the month, and 21% from the 15th to the 24th of the month. So we'll roughly say, again, 75% of people don't get paid until after the 19th of the month. Only 25% do. Of people who earn monthly. The next thing we need to look at is, well, when do firms do their RTI submission? And again, I did a Twitter poll, same caveats, only a loose indication, not a statistically representative sample. And I asked people who run payrolls to tell me when they run a payroll. Well, of those who ran a payroll, roughly 48% said they do it on the day that people are paid or the day before, and just slightly less than that, around 45%, said they did it 2 to 10 days before. So the vast majority, around 90% of payrolls are run just before payday, maybe a week before. So let's put that all together now. Maybe 25% of people, but in all likelihood less, will be able to get the money because they're paid weekly or fortnightly, but the people who started later won't. So back of the envelope, we'll say 15 to 20% of the total number. Next of those who get paid monthly, well, probably again at best only 20% of those were paid before the 19th. And then of the people who were paid later, how many of them their company would put in the RTI submission earlier? Well, what, maybe 5-6%? So overall, even being generous based on those stats, it is very likely less than the 50% of the people who started work for an employer in March are going to be eligible for help because of the date change. Less than 50%. I can't be more accurate than that, but I think it indicates the scale of people who are missing out. Now, the Chancellor never said it would help anyone, but I think there was a sort of loose indication that this was a bigger solution than it was, and it still will leave likely well over 100,000 people missing out. And of course, we have to remember, even though 50% of people may be eligible, at most 50% of people may be eligible for furlough, well, it's not compulsory that firms will furlough people. It's absolutely at the discretion of the employer. And with new starters who haven't really done much for a firm, well, there are firms certainly who are saying, well, I'm just going to make you redundant because that's easier. You're on your parole period. We can just say, no thanks, we're not going to have you anymore. So even of that up to 50% who are eligible, we don't know how many of them will actually be furloughed. Now, many people who are caught in this situation are, of course, angry with the Chancellor, and I understand it because they feel they're not being helped. I think it's important to balance here. Moving the date has helped people, and I am glad that we've seen wriggle room to move the date, and I'm thankful to the government on that. It's actually the first chink in the armour we've seen. Everything I've worked on before is about tweaking the guidelines rather than a substantial change to the formal rules. And this does like a little fire of hope to others, such as the self-employed or limited company directors who are caught, but only a little fire of hope. But it's far from a panacea. And more does need to be done for the other new starters to be looked at how they can get help. Now, if you are one of those people who are caught, I don't have a magic wand. I would certainly suggest if you have an old employer and you were working there before the 28th of February, because that's still the date that old employers can rehire and furlough you, provided the reason you can't work is due to an economic problem due to coronavirus, then I would absolutely talk to that old employer. It's not going to help most, but some people I'm having successes in are being rehired by their old employer and put on furlough. Now, why would an old employer do it? Well, there's no real cost to them. 80% of your salary is covered and they only have to give you 80%. Employers' national insurance is covered. Minimum pension contributions under auto enrolment is covered. The only real cost is there is an accrual of holiday pay if they furlough you. You can agree with them that you won't accrue the non-statutory elements of that, but the statutory elements will accrue. And of course, you do everything you can to try and persuade them. You don't give me any holiday you don't need to. Don't pay me more than 80%. Anything you can do with an old employer to get them to furlough you if you've got no other choice would help. And don't let pride get in the way of doing that. Other things apply for universal credit, of course. That is the government's main support mechanism for people who fall foul of all the other support mechanisms. And even those of you who are being furloughed can apply for that as well. Otherwise, it's look at the other forbearance measures out there, mortgage payment holiday reliefs, talk to your landlord if you can't afford to pay and you haven't got money coming in. It's not a perfect solution. There are many people who are still in the hole, and I don't have a magic wand, but you need to look at doing everything you possibly can. And I wish all of you the best, and I hope that maybe you have some savings, maybe you have income from a partner, and all of those things may be able to help you through it, but I don't have a perfect solution. Anyway, I hope this explains roughly the point. It's a bit rough and ready. It's off the top of my head, stream of consciousness, but I think it probably gets people through the scales of magnitudes here. Bye-bye.